But I think it's really important for everybody to be curious all the time and stay that way, no matter what your age is. Um, because I think that's what drives a lot of my passions. I'll get curious about something. Like when I was in school too, it's funny when I wanted to do well in something. It wasn't because I wanted to do well in it. It was because I was curious about it, and that drove me wanting to do well. Not because I wanted to get a certain grade, but because I wanted to know everything about it, and that in turn made me good at it, right, and gave me good grades in that specific thing. But then you had some cases like English. I hated English because it wasn't very interesting to me. It was like a necessity to go through
Mm.
it. Um, but that's the kind of thing that I go through is just trying to cling to that curiosity as long as you can, and then even foster it to blossom as you get older.
It's really, I think it's common for children to be curious, but it's very rare to continue that throughout adulthood because, we grow up with all these dreams and random aspirations like I want to be a firefighter, I want to cure cancer. And as kids, we kind of think that the world is ours and we can almost do anything. But as we get older, we realize that those dreams are more like fantasies. And then we kind of lose the curiosity somewhere along the lines when we have obligations to attend to and work to get done. And slowly the curiosity dissipates. So it's really rare for you to be able to carry that throughout. So it's really impressive.
Yeah, I think it's. I mean, ultimately, I was the strange kid in school. I was the one that didn't really fit in most of the time. Um, didn't was a different for sure. There's probably some words and categories that I could put in nowadays that they didn't really have categories for back in my day in the '80s when I grew up in the early '90s. Now there's all sorts of ideas like what's the spectrum and who's on what's part of the spectrum, right? And I was put on the spectrum by some people in my 30s the first time I actually got that label associated with me. It was a shock. I didn't really understand it. I don't think it's a label that's damning or a label that really is a disability in any way, shape, or form. In some ways, yes, because there's some extremes on that scale. But on that scale, there's also a certain range that you can be interesting and, for example, stay curious through your whole life because you just have that different brain pattern that wants you to be curious
Mm.
or that just always puts you in that state of mind. So, despite labels or anything else, yes, everyone's different in their own way. But I think trying to find something that you're curious about helps you to be curious no matter what kind of patterns you think in, right? It's important to just find something that you can put onto. Like in my early 20s, I mentioned, right, before I had kids, one of my first hobbies was reptiles
Mm.
because I went into the store in PetSmart. We had a cat, right? It's how it always starts. And I walked by the lizard cages, and I was just curious about it as a kid, but I didn't really have like money or anything to put towards it. Then I walked by and saw that I was really curious about them again, and I kind of thought, saw that flame build into a huge blaze of what are these things? What about them? And then from that small thinking blossomed into me breeding reptiles and having my own room dedicated to reptiles. Like it went really extreme. Like it went to the point where I had a business ultimately. And then my wife got pregnant, and I had to make a choice. Was it the reptile room, or was it an infant going to be a nursery? So I had to make a choice, and I made the right choice, obviously. Got rid of the reptile room, and then we had our daughter at that point. And even after that, I still had hobbies that interest me. So I think it's important to anchor on something that you're curious about. Everyone's curious about something, right? Just start with that and see where it goes. That's what I would say.
Interesting. So when you think about your childhood and you think about being an outsider, do you think the the way you describe the way society perceived you and curiosity had some kind of connection? Like, do you think that being curious innately makes you different in a way, or was the curiosity kind of response to being an outsider, or like what was the connection?
I think the curiosity is always there. It never went away, right? And nothing really stifled it or stomped it out. Like something like you mentioned, some people just get it because their hopes and dreams are not realistic, and they kind of forget about being curious or having a hope and dream. Um, but I approach learning the same way. But I would say it's not really, um, it's not something that makes you different per se. It's more just because I was a kid and because I had this thinking my whole life, it's just how I was. Really, that's just how I think about it. So for me, in my experience, it was always just how I was.
Have you ever dug deeper into, I guess, the curiosity of why we're even curious as humans? Like, when you think about yourself and all the random things you've done in your life, like, do you ever wonder, like, why am I so curious about this random thing?
I think yes. It's a pretty loaded question because it can go so many ways. But yes, I think it's a we're curious as kids because if you think about humans as an organic model, for example, a living, breathing version of AI, for example, if you think about organic AI, we could be an example of that, where in the beginning your model's hungry for data. What happens when I touch a hot stove? I get burnt. Oh, don't do that again, right? So it's a learning experience. So going through those experiences helps you continue learning through your entire life. So being curious helps me learn no matter what my age is. Now, I don't go to college, for example. I learn by focused learning and hyper-focused learning sometimes. Like, what about bees? I just look and focus on bees only. Watch people's YouTube channels, for example, who went through a whole process from learning nothing about bees to being a bee master within 2 years or 3 years and seeing what they learned. Right? Because I was just curious. What happens? What do you do? And then trying to think through all the scenarios myself of what could happen and then how people dealt with that. So then just continuing to iterate that myself to continue to learn about everything I can learn about. And then once that branching is done, so to speak, then I'm able to start doing that activity myself, like this basement, for example. I didn't start out with nothing. I'm like, well, how do people deal with moisture in the basement? How do people deal with it being cold or whatever the case is, right? All those things I thought about and then find solutions for it. And then when I felt comfortable, I applied that knowledge. So I think it's partly us being wired that way as humans to learn a lot as we're young, and some are able to lock that their entire life and be curious and continue learning their entire lives.
Interesting. So when you make those pivots, like from being obsessed with bees to being obsessed with a completely different thing, are they almost like 180 kind of random, or do you like transition between different ones? Or like how would you like describe your curiosity over time and how it's like developed?
It's a good question. The easiest answer is I let it wherever my brain takes me. I don't have restrictions. I don't say, sometimes I'll think like I want to learn about bees because I'm curious about it, right? But ultimately, I'll give you a great example. We talked about microgreens, and I showed you the tent that I grow microgreens in the mushrooms, etc., right? So it's like, how do you get involved in either of those? Well, for me, I wanted to be able to get more nutrients in my diet. I'm not the fondest person of vegetables. I cannot stand salads, for example. Most salads I cannot eat. They just gross me out. I don't know what it is, but I don't want to just force myself to eat something that's unpleasant to me. So I thought about different ways to get more nutrients from greens into my diet. And on my searches, I found microgreens, because apparently microgreens can be up to 6 or 60 times more nutritious than their adult counterpart. And to me, I was like, wow, that sounds amazing, right? Like I can eat small amounts and get more nutrients, sign me up. So I started researching it, learning about it. And then because I had cats living in the house, I had to get a tent to protect them. Otherwise, the cats would destroy them. So I learned about it. I got comfortable. I applied that knowledge, started growing microgreens. They were great. We still eat them to this day. I still got seeds, and I'm still going to grow them. Fun fact, when I was doing this, I was in Florida, and I was renting. So I couldn't really do a whole lot with the property when I was renting. But what you end up with when you grow microgreens is you have these mats that don't really serve a purpose when they're done, except to just decay. So I didn't want to throw them in the yard because there's nowhere for me to throw them in a yard that I'm renting that's not mine. I can't even put a shovel in the ground for the most part. So what do I do with that stuff, right? So I thought, okay, let me just try to compost it, maybe. So I bought a tumbling composter. Learned about that a little bit as I just kind of continued to cook. But then I had more microgreen mats than I can compost. It was not fast enough. So then I researched other things that I could do. So then you can use worms. I'm like, okay, let me learn about worms. And then I ordered worms online, and I started worm bins. So those like a big totes that you have, but like I have them the other side of the basement. Mm-hmm. They were full of dirt, and then the microgreen mats, and then a bunch of worms that I put in there, composting worms. And they would tear through all that over time, and I would put paper in there as well as like food scraps to kind of do like vermiposting. In that process, and I can show you the picture on my phone,
Yeah, sure.
I grew naturally just grew some mushrooms. They were actually ink caps that grew out. I didn't know what they were at first, but when I saw them, not knowing about mushrooms, the first thing I did was this. Like, oh my God, I'm going to be exposed to some spores. I didn't want to do that. So I just learned about them. I took a picture. I had the C cap at that point, and I learned that what it was a very simple mushroom that didn't harm you. It just deliquesced into a black ink ultimately. So it was actually very healthy to see that activity in your worm bin, I learned. And then I got curious about mushrooms, and then you saw I had mushroom cultures over there. So I grew mushrooms. So it kind of just branches out from what I'm learning into more curious things.
Like random pivots. Like
random pivots, but sometimes they're related. Sometimes tangentially related. But they're going to be related in some way, shape, or form. I wouldn't say there's no randomness to it. It's more about what's interesting in my experience of life every day that I want to learn more about.
That's interesting. And I've been doing this podcast for almost 2 years now, and I didn't start it with a clear goal. It was more just to talk to people and have these conversations. And I think over time, themes keep reappearing, and I feel like that theme of curiosity has appeared so many times, which is why I love to keep exploring this idea of curiosity, because I guess I never sit back to think about it, but I feel like every podcast is a deep dive into what someone finds curious, and for each person it's something completely different. Like just yesterday I was talking to someone who is just so innately curious about the human body, and that's led him to become a surgeon. And I guess the more I think about it, the more this podcast helps me realize that when we think about each individual human experience and how different each one really is, and how we can all kind of start from a blank slate and then go off to completely different areas, comes from this curiosity that can kind of almost randomly pivot different ways based on what about the world makes us really wonder and sit back and kind of be at awe in a way.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, so it is very interesting, and I wonder if that's something unique to humans, I guess, because, I guess I don't really see any other animals or species. This is getting more into, like, a philosophical realm about, like, I guess I keep wondering, like, why even is this a thing? Like, why are we so curious? Like, what kind of guides us throughout these ways? And I guess you described it as collecting information, you need to know more as, like, an AI model, but it is something that's still, I'm curious about the nature of curiosity in humans, honestly.
Yeah. It's a good thing to be curious about, right? I think it's to your point, everyone experiences life differently, and realistically, I think of the brain as one large, huge model playing that with other models within other models, right? Just constant neural connections. So the more you're able to make consistent connections, also helps you remember things. So what I found through my life is that as I make more connections through learning and process and with experience, especially direct experience and practical application of that knowledge, it helps that stick long term. Like, for example, I can pick up microgreens a year and a half, 2 years later, because I haven't done it since then, and remember what to do exactly and do it. I can remember how to finish a basement because I did one, and now I can do it again. Like, I built an addition on my house when I lived in Maryland. I built a whole room for my master bedroom. Did that myself as well, with the help of my neighbor and my father, but still, mostly myself, especially the finishing work. But I think it's just important to be curious, and there is animals that are curious too, right? Because that's really how all animals start, right? Some animals have innate behaviors, but most behaviors are learned behaviors, and that comes from the natural experience and then the curiosity that results. So I think it's really just a way to drive us as humans, especially because we think and we know, right, all that stuff. But realistically, it's about how do you interact with the environment, and how do you make it positive. That's important for me too, right? It's not just about what I want to do, but like, for example, the composting, I can show you outside before you leave. There's a big pile I have that I take all the grass, and I take cardboard that we get from like Amazon, and I'll shred it, and I'll put that with the grass clippings. So I'm taking less of an impact to the environment. Plus, I'm making really good soil for myself in my garden, right? So stuff like that's important to me, to minimize your impact and that kind of thing. So that's a curious thing that's always stuck with me too.
Interesting. Yeah, you described our brains and decision-making process as kind of like an LLM model. How similar do you think our brains are to AI models?
Well, we built AI models based on a lot of our brain connectivity and how brains work too, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's why it's so similar. But in a way, you can view humans, and this is probably a weird topic to talk about, but humans really are, if you think about organic AI, DNA also, if you think about it, is organic AI. It's programming for all living life on this planet. That's what it is. So many different switches that you could turn on or off and change so much it becomes a whole different species. Things that naturally then morph and change over time, and some become more adept at living in the environment, so then they take over and they're a dominant species, right? That happens for millions of years across Earth, as you can see from archaeological records, right? But to me, it is ultimately, because there's tons of religion aspects to it too. But to me, I've studied different religions. I'd say I'm a spiritual person. I know there's some kind of intelligent design behind everything, but I can't subscribe to a specific set of deities or what some humans have described it as being a set of religion that is the one. Because if you ask every religion, they are the only religion, they're the right religion, right? So they all can't be right. But what's similar is all the dates that they have, right? Mm-hmm. To me, so if you look at all religions, they have very similar dates. And that's because why? Well, when we're much younger species, everything was reliant on the seasons and the birth and life of pretty much everything that you grow to survive. We're hunters and gatherers, right? So that's kind of what was ingrained in us. And some maybe have built on that as a way of, some say control or whatever it is, but or to explain the meaning of life, to give comfort to those who find, fear in the oncoming mortality everybody has to face, right? That's another way to help people ease it, which it works for a lot of people. It does, but for me, I'm more curious. I don't subscribe to something that tells me how things are. I want to experience it myself. That's just how I am as a person.
That's interesting. When you describe different religions having similar dates, do you just mean on a seasonal cycle, or are there even commonalities?
Seasonal cycle that's all around the same, like the longest day of the earth and the shortest day of the earth, like the summer solstice and the winter solstice. Those coincide with major religious holidays across pretty much all the religions.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Why? I'm curious about that, right? So I think about it, and then I have to try and reason, because I can't also use very old history with any high level of degree of certainty that it's real, because of the minimal amount of history that there was available in writing at that point, and also the amount of control in the people that have power. Because they say the people that control the present control the past, right? So you control the past if you're able to wipe out for text, or for example, or change text. Why there's so many different versions of the Bible, for example. Different people had different versions of it that they thought were applicable, or different translations, right? So all that kind of stuff is curious to me. That's why I looked at other religions and kind of put the two and two together and found the similarities. This is many years ago, 20 plus years ago, when I put this kind of stuff together.
Were there other date similarities between religions that I guess are more unexplained? I guess some of them we can reason that, it follows agricultural cycles or shortest or longest days, but are there weird similarities between religions that we don't know yet? Or
not really that I can put between. A lot of times it's always something different. I mean, there's some of the fun ones you can talk about where some religions and deities and like hieroglyphics and stuff in Egypt shows things that could potentially be alien right, or giants and things they put together, but realistically, I just focus on the similarities and the dates.
Yes.
Right. That to me is a flag that's something's different, but it's the same ultimately at the core. So, but that's just me.
Interesting.
Reasoning with it.
Yeah. When you earlier talked about how the people who control the present control the past, that idea is something I've grappled with a lot, because I guess at the end of the day, you can't really accept most of history at that point, because if you even look at how we're narrating history today, as in what's happening in the present, sure there's a lot more access to the internet. It's a lot more easier to, I guess, share what's happening in the present for people in the future, but at the same time there's so much intervention in media from other factors and sources, and this propaganda, so it's still hard to even get an accurate depiction. If someone just looked at the internet today, what's actually happening in the world. So at that point, do we just throw away all of history, or can we still accept some parts of it, or what's the balance?
I think that there's nowadays, to your point, it's everywhere. It's so prevalent. Information's copied, pasted, and sent everywhere that you really can't delete history nowadays, right? Someone's got a video. Although with AI, especially with newest advancements, you can create pretty realistic and convincing videos that don't have any issues, or some small issues that you wouldn't notice at first. Wouldn't hold up in court, for example, but under normal circumstances, things are very realistic. So the amount of fake information that's pumped out there right now is extreme, and the amount of filtering that has to be involved, it only can go so long before there's like a threshold where most of the information pushed out there will be fake. And then how do you discern what's real and what's not based on all the stuff that's on the internet? Because guess what the LLMs are trained on?
The internet.
The internet. So there's that point, that curve, that it just becomes no longer good, and it's going to, at least that's my opinion, is that we're going to lose that soon enough.
That's interesting, because I mean, if the data just gets worse and worse and worse, the AI itself will get worse and worse and worse.
Yes.
So that's a scary place to be.
Because everyone's always like, give me the most recent news, give me what happened today in my responses from Gemini or Grok or Claude or whatever tools you're using today. That's the kind of stuff that we need to be mindful of. Right, but they're on it, sure. They're looking at it. I'm sure they have models in the background that score certain creators or posters that aren't realistic or have been known to be fake before, right? Mm-hmm. But at the core, it's a problem at a global scale. Like even like with all the stuff and the conflict going on in the world right now, there's so many places we could talk about. But it's concerning from that angle too, of how much could be pushed out as fake, and no one would know the difference unless you're on the ground experiencing it. Which is to my point where I got to experience it myself most times.
Yeah. But it's hard to experience everything about everywhere that's happening all the time. But we also live in a world where you kind of want to know everything that's happening all the time. Yeah. So it's a weird place to be.
It is. It's an interesting time to be alive, for sure. But yeah, I think it's important to really understand what's real and what's not. And it's important also to understand that, yes, very back in time, there was the way for most people to delete history. There was easy ways to burn entire books, libraries, Order of the Guard, etc., whatever. But nowadays it's not. Now it's more fake news. So it's more about too much information that's fake, false, versus recreating history for false facts.
Do you think there's huge parts of history you completely missed?
I think there are, yes. I think there are parts that aren't explained, or there's areas of the world that we don't go because they don't even have contact with modern society. I forget the name of the island. There's an island somewhere
in Indonesia, Oceania area.
Somewhere, maybe in an Amazon forest somewhere,
okay.
Where they don't, like, you try and come out, they'll throw spears at you, like they're old school.
There's a lot of hunter-gatherer that's
right,
Amazon,
but like, there's nothing wrong with them. Leave them alone. Like, they're living. Like, why we have to interfere?
Yes.
Right. That's like a different version of humans than iterating within that island. If you think about it.
Stuck in time.
Right. Much like we iterated our human structure and all of our DNA across time, across the globe, and more people survived because of different melanin in the skin, because of the different sun they were exposed to, etc. And it's fascinating when you think about it. As a species, what we've done and how diverse our species is, let alone all the species on the earth, and all that DNA is at its core.
Yeah. Well, on the point of history, like, I sometimes wonder, like, what if things that we fully are convinced are true are just completely wrong? Like, maybe there's maybe a few things that we've just completely got wrong. I wonder how likely that something like that could be true.
I always think religion is a big one of it, but I think that the origin of how everything started, I don't think it was just happened to be randomly happened on the earth, right? I think there was something that either, like the old thing where it came in on the bottom of an old astronaut shoe, right, from many, many years ago, there was an alien, or that we're an experiment that was put here on purpose, like a Genesis type experiment, right? Yeah. But I think there are a lot of falsehoods, but we will never know because we weren't there. We can't go back in time. There's no way for us to view that back in time. So that's kind of how I look at it. It's hard to say what's false, but the big ones now are like all the orbs and the drones and the aliens. Is there aliens going on? Yes or no? Like, just people who are diehard. I had this happen to me, but can you trust what they say? You don't know, right? Because they're prone to error too. They're human. So, I mean, but yes, I think there's a lot of things that we probably got wrong. That maybe even ancestors from many years ago, thousands of years ago, tried to depict with like hieroglyphics or whatever, but there was no way for them to articulate what was really going on, right? Like pyramids, also very fascinating to me, how they could be power plants ultimately. I'm not sure if you heard about that.
Tell me more. I've heard a little bit about pyramids.
So, like, pyramids, ultimately, they think that...
because there was the Tesla coils underneath?
Yes, and underneath where there was water running, so it was perfect, and everything was in a way that it could have generated electricity. And they had these weird metal knobs that were just nothing but contact points for this. So it was really interesting work.
So has it been confirmed that they found those Tesla coils under the pyramid? Or
I don't honestly haven't looked at it in many years. So I'm not sure if there's more advancements on it. But when I was looking into it, it's probably like 10 plus years ago, there was clear evidence that if there was water running, which there was evidence of running underneath it, that it could have generated electricity.
Wow.
And it could have been wirelessly translated, just like Tesla tried to do, and give it for free. But what happened to him?
Yeah.
He went broke. But he actually invented like all the electricity, but Edison gets all the credit.
Yeah, that was crazy. Yeah, history is a really interesting topic, and I think there are definitely things I can believe to be true based on the evidence we have now. Like, for example, evolution as a concept makes sense, but there are other parts of it that don't make sense, like the first cell. I still think evolution can explain a lot, but I feel like it can't explain like the first cell or how we went from like a single cell to multi-cell. Like those kind of big steps to me are just always like, I feel like we need to know more there. I feel like we're trying to convince ourselves that we know what happened. We really don't.
Right. And there's also huge leaps in human advancements too, in technology, where there was no track of that happening. We were stone tools forever for a long time, and all of a sudden we started getting really smart out of nowhere. Like, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Paul Stamets. He's a guy that like works a lot of mushrooms. I won't bore you with all the details, but he's a pretty awesome guy. And he talks about something like the stone ape theory, where he thinks that when we were in a certain way under that evolutionary track, but we ate a bunch of ultimately magic mushrooms that stimulated all the different receptors in our brain, we became different thinkers out of nowhere. And all of a sudden kind of went to a trajectory of being human. So it's possible if you think about it, right? Something definitely bumped us. And to your point, something bumped us from single cell and just like primal ooze, as they always say, into something that became life. It seems pretty far-fetched that all life now is from that DNA. So
yeah,
I think definitely some kind of intelligent design around that, whether it be alien or not, who knows? But definitely something intelligent has designed that. So it wasn't random.
I can agree with that because it's hard to explain that all the intricate DNA and the entire design of the human body, which is still a marvel, was just came randomly. You know, there had to be some intervention from some force that we just don't understand yet. It could be later believed to be some form of science or some kind of intelligent design, but I just don't think at our current state of science we know what that is yet.
We don't know. Honestly, we don't know. And science can try and figure it out, but we don't have the tools yet to be able to figure out how that happened. We can't, for example, take raw elements and create DNA. You can't just create new DNA, for example. That doesn't happen. You can modify DNA. There's so many variables and switches, like gene modification is a thing. It probably will become a thing that you see in your lifetime.
It's scary.
Where people get changed, whether it be for medical conditions, that's how it'll start, of course. But then it'll be enhancements and selection and all sorts of things that you can do. Like there was a book we read, Upgrade, I think it was, that talked about a little bit about that, how it could play out in the future if things do go down that path. I thought that was very interesting. What is it?
What did the book predict would happen?
It predicted that gene modification and gene editing would be a thing, and much like AI, for example, it would become something that is a problem, like global wiping out things on a global scale, or wiping out crops because you try to change something and it bore like a huge illness or whatever it was, and then cause a lot of problems to humanity. But there's still at its core was gene editing and gene modification, and how do you fix it, and how do you make humans better without making them something other than human. Like a lot of philosophical things also in that book. But it was interesting read for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I'm convinced that very soon it'll be a normal part of something we do. Like gene editing is something normal. And obviously it'll start with a realm where it feels morally correct, as in like, for example, with plastic surgery, it started for like World War I or World War II veterans who had damage to their face, etc. But then it became more mainstream in the more recent years, and then now we're looking at gene editing. Okay, they might use it to, if you have a gene predisposition for cancer, they might work on that first, but then slowly they're like, okay, I can change this and change your height or something like that. And
right, which is scary.
It is kind of scary because I guess there's two possible routes of that. Either the route A, if everyone has access to it, then it's almost like no one has access to it. But then there's also the more likely route where only a few people have access to it. And
that's how every technology starts, right?
Yeah.
I mean, everybody, the rich and famous, will be the first to get access to it because it would cost too much. Who else is going to pay for the R&D to do this kind of stuff, right? So, and then they'll get the first gene editing, or the babies with the first edited gene sequences or whatever, right? That'll be how it starts. And then people will be in their basements trying to do the same thing, right? Because they want to be able to do the same thing. And then it'll just be an issue, I think. And the book actually is pretty realistic in its predictions.
Yeah, I could see that happening. I mean, it might seem morally incorrect now, but the second you're in that position, you can convince yourself of it. I mean, you can convince yourself of many things as a human. Like, oh well, I'm only here for like the next 90 to 100 years. I might as well have a good time. Let's make my son have superpowers or whatever.
Right. If you have the capability, why not? Right.
Yeah.
I mean, wouldn't you if you had the ability to do it?
I was in that position. I mean,
if you knew that it would work 100% with no risk, would you do the same?
Most likely.
I would. Like, my son's much taller than me because he got different genes. But if I could choose him to be taller than me, I'd say absolutely. I want him to be tall, right? Because tall people have certain advantages. Some people do too. But he wanted to be tall since he was a young kid. He was the biggest kid when he was born too. So I knew he'd be tall, right? But
yeah.
A lot of things too, like I think technologies that are not really talked about a lot that will probably have huge disruption and impact to us as humans is like Elon Musk's Neuralink.
Oh, that's amazing.
It's amazing, but it's also the very beginning of a brain interface that controls cyborgs.
Scary.
Because now I can replace a whole arm, connect wirelessly to that arm, and let your brain control it.
Yes.
Which means how many parts can you replace before you're no longer human, like other cyborg theories, right? So I think that's possible, that will be the interface that connects. But like everything else, if it's something like that, it could be hacked. So that is scary at that point. But right now, it's great work. And I think, of course, anything can be exploited for bad. But the work that's being done right now to help cure diseases or give people movement, at least for controlling a mouse on the screen, right? But if you can read and help pull information from brain, then you can, and they can also write to the brain. They proved that too.
They can write to the brain?
They can write to the brain
too,
mean? Which means that the signals that are coming in, they can also create a signal.
To help you like think a thought?
Or to move a muscle or whatever the case is. So if you think about that, if you know how to create a thought,
that's scary.
That's very scary.
I feel like our thoughts are the most scary weapon. I mean, even in history, it's just ideas that have really led to the biggest revolutions and change and hardship. So
ideas are very, very, very scary and disruptive most times, but that's how we progress as a species too, right?
Yes.
And how do you come up with ideas? You got to be curious.
This is the one theme of the podcast. Yeah, it's very interesting because when you talk about gene editing and people reasoning to say that, oh, well, I'm in this position to be able to do it, so I might as well do it. Mm-hmm. I guess when I think about similar kind of examples to that kind of idea of like it's morally incorrect, but then when you're in that position, you reason to do it. I really don't think any human on this planet is evil. I don't think a single one is evil, but I think we're all logical thinkers, but the people who we deem as evil just logically think and logically convince themselves of a certain idea. And once they're convinced of that idea, they can do crazy things that to someone who doesn't have that same mental framework would ever do. So I think that's what gets scary about these kind of technologies, because I think as humans, looking at what we've done, both the most impressive things humanity's ever achieved to the most hardship and pain that we've caused to each other, it all came from like stories we've told ourselves. So I think as we enter this new realm of like, okay, well, Neuralink is helping all these patients who have, you know, paralysis or other injuries, it's helping them live better lives, so we can reason that it's a good thing. But downstream effects down the line, if it's created into something that a group of people can have access to the brains of like 100 to 200 people, like what,
or millions of people,
or million, I mean eventually
if they do it at scale, it'll be millions of people.
The downstream effects of it is where when we start to speculate, it gets kind of scary.
Now you think about different types of hardware you could put in, what it can connect to, what it could do. Can it connect to my phone? Can I have it read my text and my thoughts for me? Like all sorts of things that could potentially come out of it, right? Interesting technologies, but also dangerous at the same time.
Yes. So, I mean, we could speculate. I guess none of us really know where it'll lead, but
we'll see it. We'll experience it. We'll witness it ourselves.
This century.
For sure.
So, does it worry you at all? Like, I know we can talk about all the problems, but do you ever spend a lot of time thinking about like the dark future, or does it not bother you?
I think about things I worry about are global conflicts that could escalate into big things that have global impact. Like, for example, the tensions that were going on with Russia and Ukraine, right? Not to get too polarized on any topic, but no matter how you slice it, it created global tensions that could potentially have caused a nuclear war, an exchange of and if that happens, you know, everyone's got the code to say if any nukes get launched, to launch all the nukes we got, because they don't want to just go out. They're going to take out everyone with them. So that's going to cause major issues, right? So I think we were on the verge at some point, pretty close, And I think there's like still reverberations from that are causing other countries to get, a little smart about what they're doing, and other people are getting a little bit more aggressive about what they think is okay about doing or trying to do something, right? Like the Pakistan India thing recently, right? It's just that to me things could escalate. So that's kind of the things that I worry about that can ruin the world.
Mm-hmm.
But do I worry about things normally? Not really. I try to live life with nothing's worth the worry, but everything's worth the effort. Right.
It's a good way to live.
If you don't agree with something, you can put in effort to take action. But don't worry about it. What does worrying do? You're wasting energy. You're putting yourself in a stressful situation for what? Take action. Instead of worrying about it. But that's just me. My wife worries all the time, though. That's her job.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad we've been able to find peace in the last few decades.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's so many factors that contribute to that. Nuclear deterrence is a big one. I mean, no one wants to send nukes anymore. The value of war has gone down. The value of joining the global trade network has increased. So why go to conflict? But I think there are still a lot of tensions, though, between countries, as we've seen, around the world in different regions. So, I mean, it's never so far led to a giant nuclear conflict, but I guess the thing is, it always can, as you said, if a country wants to send a Hail Mary, if they're in a terrible position and they have access to nuclear weapons,
Mm-hmm.
or we're human, we make mistakes. Someone might logically reason that this is correct.
Or it could be hacked.
Or it could be hacked. So I guess we'll never know, and those conflicts definitely have bigger consequences. So I think we've developed good systems in place to help us prevent those conflicts. I think it's gotten better with time, but I hope that as humans, as a human race, we can figure out more systems, knowing our nature, to prevent anything from happening.
Right. What would happen? Probably seen plenty of movies where this actually plays out in the movies, but if you have some kind of global enemy that everyone shares, for example, not saying this is going to happen, but let's just say an alien invasion happens, okay? Do you think everyone's going to give any at all mind about what's going on between two countries? Or is everyone going to say, how are we going to fight off this global conflict that's floating in our atmosphere? Right? Everyone's going to kind of unite around that global kind of goal, if you will. But right now, we don't have a global goal.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's part of it. We have tribalism going on a global scale, but also at a very small scale too, with countries, even states in some cases. So we need to unite around something in order for us to really get better as a species, stop fighting, or get along, be peaceful. What is the goal we're all working towards? I feel like we're all still working towards our own goals as a country separately, instead of having a united goal. Right? Like Musk is trying to get to Mars, for example. It's a great goal to shoot for. Right, but why isn't more people involved in helping with that whole mission?
They're worried about their own stuff.
Right, they're worried about, well, how do we get to Mars first? Because we want to be able to mine it first, or be able to say we can send people there, or capitalize on it, make money on it, right? Because that's what everyone's focused on.
Yeah.
A lot of cause of wars, money's one of them. But yeah, I think it's important to have something that unite us as a species if we're expected to get better.
Well, I could understand where the countries come from in terms of the conflict of who gets to Mars first, because I guess if you keep digging deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, each individual human in each individual country just wants to make a living and support their family, and then the downstream effects of that is okay, I need to live in a country with a good economy, I need to support this, and then downstream effects, we think that we need to support our tribe no matter what the cost is, and then if that means conflict, well, we need to survive, and it's us versus them, and then on a huge global scale.
Yes.
Maybe it's exaggerated now because we kind of still think we're in those tribes, but I guess some part of our brain doesn't realize that the tribe is 8 billion people, or a couple million people, so it's a lot bigger now.
We're in lots and lots of tribes. Every country is a tribe, and within the country there's multiple tribes.
Yeah.
That's what makes it so complex.
Yeah. It's so weird to think about. I wonder if a common goal like an alien invasion would unite us or not. I mean, it makes intuitive sense that now there's a bigger threat than my day-to-day life, that the entirety of our race could disappear, right? Which is a much bigger threat. And
or an asteroid.
Yeah.
Something that just threatens the globe, that we would be better uniting our efforts as a species versus as individual tribes.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if there'll still be a lot of conflict, as in how do we approach the situation, and would that something we get over quickly because of the imminent threat, or would that still be a lot of yelling going on between 8 billion people?
Playing it out, honestly, if you think about it, there'll be panic, and looting and all sorts of things. Say I need to make sure that I'm, to your point, able to survive. My family is able to survive. There'll be some infighting happening. Of course, I think that's going to happen because everyone fears what the result is, what will happen to my family, right? Or my country or my tribe, right? But ultimately, I think at least the global leaders will have to be able to unite all the forces that we have in an intelligent way to help solve that conflict, right? I mean, people think like global warming and environmental impacts aren't a thing, but that's something we could unite around. But do we? No.
Disagree upon everything.
Right. We just worry about what my country is going to say is okay. You can dump this here, but you can't dump it in that country. Things like that, right? It's just, why is that a thing? Why isn't there global policies for that kind of stuff? You know, but that just kind of, you got to police it, you got to pay it. There's a lot of things that happen, manpower and ultimately money that drives that to police that kind of stuff. But you know, it's important still to think that if something would to threaten Earth or our way of life, then we as a species would come together. I like to think that anyway.
Hopefully, yeah. I mean, hopefully that there is something that helps us unite in more recent times. Cause I think that as tensions start to escalate, it doesn't have to be an alien invasion, but something that we can all agree upon could bring us together. But that's a hopeful future, and I think that's not. Again, like I know I asked you before, like, do you worry about this kind of stuff? Like, I'm happy to talk about it, but I feel like for some reason it doesn't worry me. I don't know why. I mean, I still feel like somehow we'll figure it out. I guess that's like the hopeful part of me. And
yeah, I don't worry really. I just worry more about what some countries would do in response to other countries' efforts and how it could impact everybody on a global scale. But I like to think that if we were have something that we can unite around as a species, we would unite. But other than that, yeah, I don't really worry about that kind of stuff.
Have you ever thought about, like, besides a big threat, like, what are some of the things that we can unite upon as a race? That, like, what are, like, big actions we could take from, like, global leaders or UN leaders? Like, what could they do in the position they have?
I think it's advancements in technology that better the race or improve our way of life without impact to the planet. Those could be global goals that we can unite around. How do we get better with providing food at a large scale, right? Could we pilot something maybe potentially as like a new way of life? Like something I always pondered a lot is years ago, not even too long ago, 100 years ago or so, people had hyper locally sourced food. Why? Because we didn't have refrigerated trucks. You had to have food that was fresh, otherwise it would spoil and you wouldn't have access to it. So there was lots of small little farms everywhere dotted all over the place to feed, almost like small little setups or tribes, towns had their own setups, right? In comes walk refrigeration. It's new technology, it's disruptive. Now you can truck it in from anywhere in the country.
Or the world.
In the world now, exactly. I've actually watched some things that went from somewhere in Africa, got sent somewhere to Brazil to get packaged up, and then got sent somewhere in the United States into a store. It took like weeks. So a lot of times, the food we get is weeks old. We don't even know it. We say it's safe and all that, but we know that's not true all the time, right? Mm-hmm. But yeah, generally it's safe. But that technology alone kind of removed our ability to be able to fend for ourselves and fend locally. If you had people that were growing food, for example, would famine be a thing? Probably not, right? If everyone had the requirement to have a small garden with so much to be able to supply your food for your family, let's say 25% of the stuff you need has to be supplied by your own garden, that'd be something fun to try. Just as a requirement, right? Mm-hmm. Requirement to compost your stuff. You don't throw anything that could be potentially compost to the curb. That's what we do. We have a bin in our kitchen.
This is a requirement you'd give to like countries around the world?
Or just like a small pilot test group, right? Not to say you would control it, but you're trying to find a new way of life.
Yes. So
let's just say some people volunteer to live in this utopian-like society that are okay with doing these things, that want to do it. Like, just try it. They're okay to grow mushrooms because mushrooms literally grow on trash if you want them to, and they produce food for you that are very nutritious. But yet we invest in like beef, for example, because it's what people want. They want the meat, they want the taste of beef, etc. And it's what's big in this country because it's fattening and it's high calorie. But realistically, mushrooms would be a much better option as opposed to meats. Or if you want to do meat, then have some chickens on your property. I've had 17 chickens at one point. That's why I'm a fan of chickens.
Amazing.
They lay an egg a day. The hens do. I never had a rooster. I only had hens. And if you wanted a rooster, you can grow your own chickens and then have meat birds too. And you can have your own meat at that point. But then you got to actually go through the case of cutting it open and processing that bird. No one wants to do that. They don't want to think about it. They want to get it in a package from the store and say, oh, it's chicken. No, it was a bird with feathers that someone pulled apart for you. Right? But people don't want to think about that part of it.
That's where it gets hard, because I would love if every society around the world has locally sourced food. I mean, the amount of preservatives and chemicals that are placed just to preserve food that's traveling around the world before it gets to your stomach is really wild. And I wonder if it's even can you make a scalable solution where we can still feed the entire world? Because I mean, I guess there's two problems we're looking at, right? I guess for famines, I guess countries around the world that have a high rates of famine, that could be potentially fixed if there is like money invested into creating a system where now we have a regulation where there needs to be this many farms in each region.
Yes.
Maybe they could solve famine. But let's look at a country like America, for example, where maybe famine is not the biggest problem, but unhealthy and obesity and diabetes and cancer is a problem, right? Mm-hmm. I guess we like to brush away like that the chemicals in our food are causing those problems, and instead we like to be like, well, I'm living in New York City, I'm busy, I have work, I'm going to go grab lunch at this restaurant, I'm going to go to the supermarket, buy the cheapest option I can, who cares where it came from, who cares who opened it. I guess those societies will be a lot more resistant to like, oh, wait, now we have a farm over here, like a rooftop farm in New York City, or this farm in this society here, and because it'll definitely be more expensive.
It would be more expensive, but why? Because it's rare and supply and demand, right? So it's not a lot available. So if someone says, for example, fresh microgreens, the tray I showed you, it's 10 inches by 20 inches. If I were to sell that to someone, it'd be like $40 to $80 for that amount of microgreens, which is insane if you think about it. But the reason is no supply and demand that drives that value up.
Yes.
But if everyone grew, for example, some microgreens or whatever they want to grow in their garden, it offsets that. Now it's available to everybody. Mm-hmm. Think about like cannabis in California and Colorado. It's highly prevalent. There's a lot of supply, and there's demand's high, but the supply is so high that it's cheap. Mm-hmm. Right? So I think it's supply and demand that drives some of that. And folks that are really hyper focused on getting hyper fresh food, which is hyper locally sourced, like you're talking about, like on rooftops, etc., everyone's going to flock there. Which then, how do you deal with that? Is you drive the price up to then make more money, right? Because it's all capitalism. But survival, to your point, when someone's in a country that's starving, if you're able to like invest in a small, cheap greenhouse setup, bring in some fresh soil, teach them how to do a certain process to turn their waste products into fresh soil they can use for growing their own food, and then recycle and grow in a permaculture kind of society. I think that's something that we can get around and start at least trying.
Yeah, I'd be happy to hopefully. I mean, I feel like a lot of groups are trying to try doing that as well. I mean, I guess the awareness of the problems with the food we're eating is definitely growing. So I'm definitely hopeful groups around the world and their initiatives and entrepreneurs can help to fix those problems.
Hopefully.
I wonder, is in your solution, is it like there's a farm that supplies maybe the people in that area, or is like every individual person is growing their own?
When I talked about earlier, so in that case it'd be like, I wouldn't say a requirement, but strongly urged and suggested that you supply yourself with X% amount of food that you need within your own garden. And if you don't know how to do that, then help will be provided so that you can make sure you understand how that can be done.
Interesting. Like what kind of help? Just like guidance on like how you do
like
it?
Experts to come in and help. Like this, like someone who helps out, that you pay to help with all the gardening needs, a horticulturist that helps understand what the soil problems are if you have soil problems, right? A chemist, all this kind of stuff that could be, again, takes money and investment, but if you set it up in a certain way, it becomes part of the culture, part of the society. It's the normal. And if everyone's got extra beans or something, they can give it to their neighbor who happens to be lacking. Then you're talking about having community. Well, we don't have any communities anymore. I have neighbors here, sure I do, but I won't talk to them hardly ever. Mm-hmm. There's no community. Where there was
not the same.
Years ago, that was community. Sharing things, borrowing a cup of sugar from your neighbor, that was a thing back then. It's not a thing anymore. At least not in the communities that I lived in.
Yeah. Interesting. I think culture is honestly the biggest way we could probably fix a problem like this. But I mean, again, humans are resistant to change, so I'm curious about the how we're gonna do that. And there's probably ideas people will come up with that can help guide us. And I mean, we've come up with so much crazy shit in the past. I'm sure that can't be the hardest thing in the world.
Right.
But I still just it's hard for me to believe that investment, or even if we get a big enough supply, like I feel like the industry level packaging and production will always be cheaper. So I feel like the incentive for that will always be there.
It's like my wife always says, how much time do you spend to make a loaf of bread when I can buy a loaf of bread for $2 in the store? I'm like, yes, but my bread has 3 ingredients: flour, water, salt. The bread you're buying in the store has like 16 ingredients, and most of them are preservatives. So that's the difference, right? It's much better when you make it yourself. It tastes better when it's fresh. When you pull something off the vine, like my kids, when I grew beans, sugar snap peas, etc., they would take them off the vine. They would pick off the one spine that was too fibrous, and they'd eat it right off the vine because that's how fresh it was, and they tasted so much different. Just like the eggs I had when I had chickens. When you have free-range chickens that do their own thing and eat whatever they eat, the eggs are like dark orange in the yolk.
Wow.
They're not yellow like that pale yellow in the Michigan sign, for example. That's the yolks you get in the store.
Yeah.
Sometimes worse. But that's not how yolks are for real when they're nutritious.
That's
They're like dark orange.
I didn't even know that.
They taste completely different. Also, did you know that when you have an egg that comes out of a chicken, you don't have to refrigerate it for months?
Really?
Yes. Because if it's in like the summer heat, no. But if it's on the counter in your house where it's climate controlled, it could be there for a long time. And the reasoning is when it comes out of the chicken, there's a mucosal coating called the bloom coating that hits the egg. But when commercial farmers process eggs for delivery across the country, one of the things they do is they wash the eggs. Why? Well, because they have to be clean. Otherwise, consumers will complain and think they're dirty. But in reality, they probably had some chicken poop on them that they had to brush off or wash off. And they bleached them to make sure there's no salmonella on them. And at that point, that bloom coating, that mucus coating is gone. Now the egg is permeable again and can get bacteria introduced to it, which makes them go bad and sour and rot. So because of refrigeration and providing eggs at scale at long distances is the reason you have to refrigerate your eggs. Otherwise, you don't have to.
Wow.
I had them on my counter forever and never refrigerated them, and they're never sour. Unless I happened to get a bad one that was at the bottom of the coop, I didn't notice it, and a chicken kicked it up one day, and I grabbed it, and it was in the summer heat. I was like, ooh, those aren't good. They're like liquid. But never really refrigerated them. Never got sick. Never had an issue.
I'm sure even the organic eggs are getting bleached and everything as well.
They're probably treated in some way, and there's only so much space a chicken has to have before it's considered free range. So they could technically have a bigger cage if they consider free range in some places.
What are the regulations? Nobody knows.
It's silly. I had just birds that I built my own coop outside and built them outside pen areas so they wouldn't get attacked by things when they were outside. I let them in the yard every now and again, and they ate every bug in my yard, every single one. They would take all the bugs out, every spider, everything, and they would go back in the coop at night and I let them lock back in. And that was it. They were very happy birds.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Wow. I mean, I've thought about this a lot because I just don't see a solution in the future for my dream of a healthy lifestyle without having a farm that I do everything myself with, right? And I mean, when I went to India, my dad's side of the family, when we visited his parents, they live in a smaller village, so it's more like your traditional kind of community society. Mm-hmm. So as you were describing before, and the food they get there is really fresh. I mean, they have like a rooftop garden in their house, and it's like a place called Assam in the east of India. So they have a rooftop garden. They grow their vegetables there.
Like the tea? Assam?
Yes, Assam tea. It's huge over there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's right by the China border, too. So
okay.
The whole tea growing thing is huge over there. But yeah. They have a rooftop garden, and they don't have eggs and chickens themselves, but they go to a local person who does it, and they kill it the same day they give it to you.
Exactly.
Right in front of your eyes, right? So, I mean, that level of organic fresh doesn't exist anywhere in America. So.
And they're probably all very healthy.
Yeah, they are.
Exactly. That's the point. So by making things easily accessible and by, removing the need to have a farm in every town and pushing it out to somewhere where you don't smell the cows, that kind of stuff, right? Now we are getting sick because of all this stuff. I firmly believe in that. So I try to grow as much as I can myself and provide food, but I have a family of 5 and 2 teenage boys. That's not going to happen.
Yeah. So what do you still do at home now? Do you do any part of it at home, the growing, or?
Well, because we just moved here in August, The first thing I did was start my compost. That's the important thing, is soil health and having the right nutrients. So I was at the end of the growing season in August, so I was going to start growing something. So I started that compost, had it over winter. I'm still continuing to add to it. But ultimately, that's the start of how I'm going to start growing vegetables underneath the tree area. I'm going to start growing planters, if not this season, then probably next season and next year. That's to make sure I have enough soil, number one, and make sure that I have enough time, number two. So those are the two things that I need to make sure I can tend to the garden appropriately. And because I plan on doing the beehive this year, I didn't start a garden except for that small flower garden in the corner to attract bees, one, and also because my daughter wanted a flower garden in the corner. So we did that together.
Yeah. Well, as I feel like I will start to make excuses as I get older that, oh, time, money, all those things. But it is a dream I have, and I think when you really have a dream that you care about a lot, it will somehow find a way to become reality. That at least by the time I'm married, have a family, late 20s, I can.
Does it have a garden?
Yes.
I had in Maryland, it was the most I ever did with gardening because I had my property. I had nothing else to do at that point. I had kids that were young and they would be outside playing anywhere, my dog, and I wanted to add more things to it. So I had chickens that had the coop and the hay, and then when they poop on the hay, guess what? Those are two things you need for new dirt and compost. So I would take that stuff out. I would have it go in the garden and let it turn for a season or two, and then I would use it as soil. And it grew tomatoes that were this big. Everything I grew, there were squash that were this big.
Wow.
Because of the amount of nutrients that were in the chicken and hay mixture.
Exactly.
So I didn't buy any dirt. I just used my own dirt that I made. So that's kind of was my first thought was get the dirt right, start that going off nice, and once I have good dirt, then I can start growing my own food. Because I don't know what's in the soil that was here before, right? I'm not sure what kind of stuff was there before. So giving it a season to kind of get normal and add new stuff to it would probably be good for something I want to consume from the ground.
Yeah, I feel like living a normal life is so hard these days because even if you're not even, let's get away from food for a second. Like I remember my friend was teaching me to do like a backflip or something at university, and it was like we were doing it on grass, and I was shirtless because it was really hot that day, and I remember trying to do one, and I rolled on the ground, and right after I did that, my whole back was itching for the next hour because all the pesticides they put in there. I'm like, damn, we can't even do normal fun activities anymore because there's pesticides in the grass and there's all these preservatives in the food and everything is so standardized and everything. It's hard to live like the kind of traditional happy life, healthy life in America these days.
It is, and that's the diet that we're fed. It started because we couldn't find people that make weight when we wanted to send them to the World War I and II, right? So they changed the American diet to be beef and wheat heavy, so we would get.
Well, when did that happen?
That was back in I think World War One.
So it wasn't beef heavy before then?
It was we had it, but it wasn't as prominent as it is, and pushing the amount of food that were calorie heavy out to the masses because they needed more able-bodied men to go to war. So they pushed that type of diet everywhere, and now it just stuck. So now everything is wheat. Look at our diet.
Oh yeah,
it's wheat and everything.
Yeah.
But it's high calorie. It's got a little bit of protein in it. It's a high carb. It's going to bulk you up so you can be shipped up and shipped out, right?
Wow.
So that's really why our diet is the way it is.
I'm sure around that time is when things started to get standardized too, right? Like end of the 1900s.
Refrigeration.
Yeah.
Well, think about World War I time frame. Refrigeration came out shortly after, right? All the different farms kind of went down. Farmers was a good life back then. A lot of farmers they supplied an entire community. Everybody needed the farmer, right? Everyone loved the farmer. You knew your farmer. You knew your butcher. You don't anymore. You don't know who that person is unless you happen to talk to the person who's in like the ShopRite or wherever you go, who happens to work in the butcher department. But that's not your real butcher.
No, it's
they didn't kill the animal.
Yeah.
So that's the difference. We're disconnected from it. I think that's part of the problem.
It's tough. But yeah, I mean, I think that the awareness is growing more. I mean, the standardized process really grew, I think, mid-1900s, late 1900s, where I think late 1900s is when it started to become super standardized in the production, shipping, and consumption in grocery stores. And I think maybe it's just because of the spheres I'm in, but I feel like I do believe in the last couple of years the awareness has increased. Like, I think a lot of my closer friends are more aware of it, and they do more about it. And then some of my casual friends, like, just hear things on TikTok or something, and then they know the word seed oil or something. So I do think that awareness is growing, and then there's apps like Yuka now that help you to identify, like, should I buy that product or that product? And I think they're good first steps. So at least from a cultural standpoint, I think the awareness is very important. I think the culture is probably going to be bigger shift here, just because if you look at the industry level, the incentives like keep pushing you to standardize it, and because the consequences are all long term. Like you don't see the effects of what you eat till you're like in your late 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s when you start to see the cardiovascular impacts and the cancer and all these different things. So
it's already killing you. You just don't know it yet.
Yeah, it's very slow.
It's a slow death.
Yeah, so I definitely think because of that, the culture is probably going to be the biggest driving force than some huge institutional change. But then again, like hopefully we get more actors who come in, raise more awareness, and help us to change things at the institutional level. But
right. I mean, think about the answer. If you were getting obese, for example, which obesity is a big problem in this country too. But if you're getting obese, everyone's like, well, eat a salad. I was like, well, that's one of the worst things you can eat with all the pesticides and things on it and the things they spray on it, right? If you look how they treat food in this country, it's eye-opening to some of the things you find. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to grow my own food, and like I was talking about microgreens before, right? Just it was interesting, and I tell you, I can eat a salad that I grew out of my garden, no problem.
Really,
I don't mind the taste of the salad, but I feel like my palate can pick up on the chemicals that are in the salad you buy in the store. I don't know what it is, but I cannot bring myself to eat it. It tastes different.
Yeah. Wow. It's crazy. I think even beyond food, I mean, there's chemicals in like the products we use and things. I think I've been opening my eyes to that more, like what body soap I use, if I'm spraying Febreze, what chemicals are in there. And I think living a healthy life just takes so much more action as an individual.
Because you're immersed in it. It's everywhere. It's all around you. You can't get away from it. It's in all the stores. Most of the products have things you probably shouldn't have in a product, but they're okayed, right? So to your point, yeah, you stick with natural living, right? And you're able to be healthier, but that requires a lot of work. And a lot of times people don't want to put in the work. I talked about before, we need time, energy, and money, right? Most people don't even have the energy or want to put forth the time to do something like a garden, because that takes effort.
A lot.
Otherwise, you get weeds, things overgrow it, it gets overgrown with rodents or insects, and you have no more food that you can eat. So you have to put in. Exactly. Then you go to the grocery store, you go to the whatever fast food chain, right, which is not really the healthiest choice.
Exactly. Yeah, very interesting. Do you think that our future is hopeful in this area at least? I know that there's certain topics we touched on that might be less hopeful, but do you think that based on what you've seen more recently?
I think over time, to your point, eventually we're going to see the impacts of all the preservatives and things that we have over time. There's going to be studies that are done, hopefully, that get enough light that show that this is a problem. Like if you look at Europe, that's a good sign of positive change. Look at the difference of ingredients for certain brand names in Europe versus the United States ingredients. Have you ever done that?
I have.
That's a good example of positive change.
Yeah. I think there was like one, it might have been fruit snacks where it was petroleum jelly as an ingredient here and then watermelon juice over there or something like that.
Right. It's all natural, or it's a lot less things that you can't pronounce in the list of ingredients. Because like citric acid, something's natural you can use as a preservative without using all the other stuff that has glutamates at the end or whatever, right? So that's kind of what Europe is doing, is trying to go healthier, because as a country, it's your responsibility as a governing body of that country to make sure that people are safe and can live long, healthy lives. You know, why would you want people to die young? So unless that's the goal, who knows? But I think it's important for you to take control over what you put in your body and provide to your family as food.
What advice do you give to younger people?
Stay curious, of course. Don't lose that curiosity. If you already have, get it back. Find something that interests you, really interests you, not someone says, oh, check this out, it's kind of fun, or, you know, like when you were a kid, your mom and dad pushed a certain topic on you, or a certain like profession that you should be, like be a doctor, be a whatever, right? That was something that was suggested to you, but something that comes from within that you have as a curiosity, foster that, and keep that going, and keep learning. Don't stop learning. You stop learning, then your model doesn't change, and then you are set in your ways. That's why they say that way, right? I think just keep learning, be open, and be playful, right? Don't take things so serious all the time. There's a certain way to do things, but it's the same thing I give my kids, although I do have to talk sternly to them sometimes because they're teenage boys. But yeah, I think just stay curious is the biggest thing.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for sitting down with me, having this fun conversation. We touched on a lot of different topics, from
We did.
the world conflicts to the health of America to being curious. So it's a pleasure. Learned a lot.
Yes.
And,
Thank you, Shaw. I appreciate the time as well.
Of course.
All right. Thank you.
Of course.